This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast and the Business Minute Podcast. Here are 15 market updates. So let's call this Market Update, 15 quick notes. First, the Fed raised rates yesterday by 25 basis points. Many people expected they would take a pause. Others were pleased to see them not move back to a 50 basis point raise. Probably more important, and we'll talk about this on a separate podcast, Chairman Powell did say that the Fed is near the end of raising rates, at least for the time being. We'll talk about this in another podcast on Treasury Secretary Yellen and Chairman Powell walking two different tightropes. We'll talk about that separately. Second, the markets fell yesterday as the Fed announced the rate hike and the potential for a difficult economy. And people were probably more responding with negativity to his thoughts about an upcoming recession than they were about further rate hikes, as he sort of indicated they're close to a pause on rate hikes. Third, the NASDAQ fell 1.6%, the Dow 1.63%, and the S&P 1.65%, so all around the same amount. Fourth, the 10-year and the 2-year Treasury yield both fell, basically on long-term fears that at some point the Fed's going to have to reduce rates due to recessionary problems. Fifth, Bitcoin is up significantly year to date. It's right about 27,000 or so. It's down a little bit over the last few days when it crested about 28,000. Sixth, the market points up today, looking to recover some of its losses from yesterday. Seventh, Ford, and we'll talk about this in a separate podcast too, is working on pivoting to electric vehicles. Like many, it's finding that more challenging than expected. It lost $2 billion last year on electric vehicles. It's expected to lose $3 billion this year on electric vehicles. It's making it up with its traditional sales of the F-150 and other Ford trucks and other Ford gas and traditional vehicles. Eighth, UBS is taking over Credit Suisse. Let's hope these big banks have the capacity to actually take over these other banks and that the nations don't go broke trying to save them all. Ninth, great article today in Reuters about leveraged buyouts being on hold as people have trouble finding financing and figuring out financing. I'll say along that lesson what that looks like. 10th, and we'll talk about this separately in the podcast too, Treasury Secretary Yellen having a very difficult time walking this fine line between assuring investors or depositors that they'll be safe, but at the same time not wanting to give total blanket comfort to depositors for fear that will just be a bill too big to pay by the United States and the FDIC. So Treasury Yellen fighting a very tough battle, and it has consequences. 11th, one of those consequences, First Republic Bank, after she said yesterday that she wouldn't offer a blanket assurance to depositors, fell another 15%. It's down 90% year to date and 92% over the last 12 months or so. So that's what's happened with First Republic Bank. 12th, NVIDIA, the chip darling, is up 81% year to date after being down a similar amount last year. Amazing how much that's recovered. 13, a story on remote work, how bosses that were once all in on remote work are now a little bit less excited about it and thinking that it's hurting productivity. Finally, 14th, we wrote yesterday about the 5 largest cap companies. That's Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Berkshire. A good article today in the Wall Street Journal about how much those 5 companies, particularly Apple and Microsoft, have a disproportionate impact on almost all index investors because they make up such a big part of the indexes because their market caps are both above $2 trillion. The Apple's almost 2.5. In any event, the 15th thing we're following is the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast has now reached 2.5 million downloads, making progress. Thank you for listening. In our LinkedIn post and our newsletter, there's a story about the 15 most listened to guests, fascinating group of people. Thank you for listening to the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast and the Becker Business Minute Podcast.